hive inspections. And all of the talks that I give, I try and overlap a little bit, just so you can kind of see what to expect for the next talk. And hive inspection is kind of the most important topic of the whole year, really. So every talk, I'll give you some pictures of what to look for, just to kind of give you an idea, what's going on in your hive. And a lot of it, it's really, seeing the real thing is so much better than a picture, but this is the best I can do. So if you have seen something in your hive and you want to know about it, raise your hand and tell us about it. So somebody else already talked about, he opened up the lid and he saw little gray bugs crawling around. And if they're kind of spindle-shaped, long ones, those are called springtails, and they're just going around eating the debris and kind of mildew that forms on the top of your lid. Totally normal, it's not a bad sign. Knowing what a mite looks like, you just, until you've seen one and go, oh, that's it, a lot of times you just kind of gloss over it. It's in the background, you don't even really see it. So be happy the first time you really see a mite, because then now you'll be able to see it every time. But if you've never seen a mite, you probably have one, you're just missing it. And I can show you a bunch of pictures of it, but it really helps to kind of see it on a bee or something like that. Because you should be on the lookout for it. And so next month's talk will be all about diseases and what to look for. Okay, so the one thing I want to start off with is kind of a seasonal alert. I've been getting a lot of calls from people who set up their packages or their nukes and are getting their hives robbed out. Okay, so bees, especially when the times are tight, will actually rob each other for food. Okay, so in the spring, when there's a lot of forage going on, they're out getting forage because they probably prefer to get nectar rather than try and fight it out for some honey. But what's happening is the weaker hives, like your packages and your nukes, people are feeding them, spilling a bunch of feed around the hive, and it attracts nearby hives to come in and steal everything they've got. And they don't have much, and then also what happens is they literally fight it out, and a lot of your bees get killed. And some of the, especially the nukes that have some resources to fight over, they're getting completely annihilated by the neighboring hive. And at first you may not realize what's going on, but usually you can shut it down if you realize it early enough. And what you'll see is the bees that are landing on the landing pad as they come in, you'll see bees actually struggling. They'll grab onto each other and fall off and sort of struggle on the ground. And you'll see them come in big waves. And normally when a bee comes and lands on the landing pad, they'll get met by a guard bee, they kind of talk for a second, and then they let them in. But if there seems to be some kind of resistance at the entrance, where some bees are facing out and some bees are facing in, and then they're rolling off the edge of the hive, that's kind of an attack situation. And there's always a little bit of this going on, so if you see it once, don't worry about it. But if you see hundreds of bees dead in front of your hive, that's a sign that you're getting robbed. And if they rob you a little bit, it's not a problem, but a lot of times they'll send the whole hive out, and they'll completely eliminate your hive. So, a couple things. Reduce the entrance size. A lot of people are worried their bees aren't able to come in and out. In nature, a lot of times, their hive actually is accessed by something about as big as your finger. So the whole hive can get in and out of a tiny little entrance. So don't worry about stopping them down too small. But that single entrance is a ton easier to defend. The other thing you can do is eliminate food spills. So sometimes, those feeders are kind of leaky. If you do spill some sugar near the hive, hose it down so it dilutes it and it doesn't smell like anything. Okay, so one of the problems with the supplements you add to the feed is, they smell like lemongrass oil or stuff that the bees like. That can be smelled for a long distance. And if it stays in the hive, it's okay. It actually encourages your foragers to feed on it. But if you spill some of that near your hive, it's a good idea to try and hose it out and dilute it, because it will attract bees. And then once you see robbing in progress, you can either staple a screen over the entrance of the hive. Don't worry about the foragers that are out in the field. They'll come back eventually. But basically, don't let any other bees in the hive. The other thing you can do that's a little less invasive is you can throw, so here's an example on the left. people are like, are my bees swarming? And it's like, no, they're getting attacked. And you'll see bees like struggling on the ground like that. And you'll see a lot of dead bees piling up as well. What you can do is throw like a wet blanket or a wet sheet over it, and that'll keep the bees from coming in and out. And they've actually taped up a bunch of it. And then this entrance reducing, you can see there, the bees have to pile up there, and it's pretty easy to defend. And it's really tragic. I mean, your whole hive will go in like an hour. So what I'm going to talk about today, seasonal hive management. It's a little early to be managing your hives, but I'm trying to tell you about it before it needs to happen. And then when you're looking through your hives, as they start to build up comb and you get more and more different stuff to look through, I'm going to try and give you example pictures of what is everything. So people are calling me, what are these bigger cells? What are those? What are the cells that have yellow stuff in it? And we'll kind of go through that. So to remind people, there's a 21-day life cycle from the egg that the queen lays to emerging as an adult. And then, so you probably, how many days has it been since we got our bees? It's probably, you're just starting to get your first brood emerging. So he was saying that he's starting to see the color of his bees change. Okay, so when you get a package of bees, they'll give you, say, an Italian queen, which is kind of bright yellow, and then you'll have a mixed bag of bees that go with her. And what you'll discover is after about 20 or 30 days, you'll start to see, say, a color change in your hive. All the bees are starting to look lighter in color, and what it is the adult bees that you got in your package came from California, and the queens maybe came from Arizona. They may not even be the same strain. And they're slowly taking over the population. And within about 60 days, all of your package bees are gone. So you'll actually find that your hive character will change as well. Sometimes people say, oh, my hive's a little bit aggressive to start out with. It'll mellow out. And it often, the package bees are foragers, which tend to be a little bit more touchy, and they're kind of ornery after being in a truck for a week. But they kind of calm down literally because they get replaced by common bees. So kind of, take some pictures or something like that and look at what your hive looks like now, but then in 2 weeks, take a picture and you'll actually start to see more and more of a particular strain of bees. So your package bees or even your nuke bees are taking care of the larvae. You're starting to get the first new adults emerging. Those guys still aren't out foraging yet. So they're actually, mostly you're building a population of nurse bees at this point. So hopefully this is not how it's going. I mean, how did people find their package installation? Did anybody get stung? Nobody got stung? Oh man, somebody's getting stung. It's surprisingly not as traumatic as you might expect. A lot of people freak out about it. Certainly your relatives are all worried about it. So working with bees, a lot of people early on will be like, gosh, what did I buy all this gear for? These guys are really mellow. I can work on them in flip-flops and a t-shirt. If you're careful, you can. But as the summer progresses and more bees are there and there's more and more resources, and then other hives are coming in and trying to rob them, they get a little bit more defensive and it gets harder and harder to do that. But a lot of people make it all the way into August, just being slow and careful, working in a t-shirt. Make sure it's not a black t-shirt. But they will eventually get a little bit more defensive, and a little bit of gear helps. But really, if you just work slowly, a lot of times I'll do inspections without any gear on.
Why not a black t-shirt?
For some reason, bees absolutely hate dark colors. So like you'd be in a bad position. I'm not even dressed very well for a bee. I think the only guy here is probably the two guys in the white t-shirt. I mean, they really make the bee outfits light colors for a reason. So I have a white bee outfit with a little black camera on it about as big as my thumb. And in all my movies, you can see the bees like dive bombing the camera because that little bit of darkness kind of makes them think that it's some kind of animal. And actually, it's the little lens. I put a piece of tape over the lens so it's not shiny, and they don't attack it anymore. So it looks like a little beady eye. And they actually will go after that. So dark colors just don't go over well. or stinky. Like I had a jacket that my dog slept on a lot. It was a jean jacket, it was light colored. I figured I'd throw that on to protect me from the bees, but it kind of stunk like a dog. Well, I got stung. So this is what it should look like when you work on the bees. There's no bees actually flying around. It almost looks artificial. It's like, wait a minute, there's no bees in that guy's jacket. But if you're being careful about it, that's really what it should look like. Okay, so this is basically the next couple months of talks. We installed our package, we installed our nuke, and right now we're trying to make sure that things are going well. So right by now, you should know if you need a new queen, or if your queen isn't doing well, or your brood population isn't building up. And so if what I show you doesn't look familiar, we should talk about your queen. Okay, so what to look for, and then splits and swarm control are more kind of to give you guys an idea of what's going on if you're a second-year beekeeper, or you're thinking of what's going to go on next season, or you're looking out for a swarm. So you kind of want your hive to do really well, but not too well, because if it does really well, what it does is it splits off and flies away. So with half your honey and half your bees and your queen. So you want to keep that from happening. That's relatively rare, almost never from a package. A nuke sometimes will do it if they're really building up strong. But a second-year hive is kind of itching to do some kind of swarm. So I'll show you how to look for that. And then, so the next couple talks, I'll talk more about disease and kind of how to keep things going. So how do you maximize them being able to harvest honey? So here's a table of kind of what are the chief issues for each season of the year. And so early in spring, if you have a hive from last year, you want to make sure they don't get too damp. Okay, so people actually will lose hives that made it through the winter, but then in spring it's raining a lot and they put in a lot of bee feed and things like that. There's a lot of moisture in their hive and they can't keep it sort of warm and dry. So you want to make sure there's some kind of ventilation. It doesn't make sense to kind of keep them warm, to give them some ventilation, but it's the water that kind of sucks the heat out of the hive, not the air. Spring for your new hives, obviously, feeding is the main concern. But if you have a hive from last year, you want, and also a new hive, Nosema and Varroa and American foulbrood. So the Varroa mites, you probably don't know what they look like yet, or you haven't seen them, and their population is just starting. So I noticed the nukes from here and the packages from here had been treated for mites. So we probably had the best start that we can have, but they will start to build back up again. If you have too much moisture, you'll get nosema, which is the bees will actually get dysentery and they poop in the hive. And your bees get real aggressive if they have nosema. And then in summer we'll talk more. So next time I'll talk all about how to recognize the different diseases, because that's when they're most evident. So right now they're building, but they're even harder to detect. So the main goal for inspection is to look at how the queen is doing. So what they call the brood pattern. So are most of the eggs she's laying hatching and then turning into adult bees, or is there some kind of failure along the way? Then is she actually producing enough of them? So there's success rate and then there's total amount of bees that she's producing. And did the bees think she's right? Okay, so if the worker bees don't think she's up to snuff, they'll actually start making what are called supersedure queen cells. So the bees are the best judge of whether the queen is, got a good future. So I always keep a real close eye out for those supersedure cells. And basically what they are is they'll take and kind of promote an embryo into a new queen. And if they're starting to make those, it means that you're done. Sometimes they will make these anyway, as I think always is like a warning to the queen, you better keep going. And if you look, they'll be empty. So the little cup won't have an egg in it. But if it has an egg in it, that's a warning to the queen. It's kind of like a shot across the bow. If you see a lot of them, it either means the queen is gone or she's gone sterile. And then high buildup. You're making nurse bees right now, but in about a month, would be mainly building up the population for foraging. So the frame on the left is kind of the ideal frame, and the frame on the right is sort of, uh-oh, something's not right. And if they always look this obviously different, it would be no problem. The problem is you're usually somewhere in between and you're headed in one direction or the other. And the key is to kind of recognize it early enough that you can actually, so there's not a lot of management techniques you can do in a hive. You can get a new queen, which is kind of the answer to a lot of problems. You can feed them more, you can reduce the population, or you can increase the population of bees. But besides that, I guess you could add a chemical if there's a specific disease you've recognized. But it's pretty simple, but knowing when to do that is kind of the trick. So here's kind of the flow chart. Here's where you want to be. If they get too healthy, they'll make swarm cells and split half your hive, and you lose half your bees. If you're really lucky, you'll see it in a tree and you can catch it, and they think they've made a new hive, and you're good, you got an extra hive. But if they're kind of failing, you want to get it before they fail too far. So remember, like a package of bees, if there hasn't been a queen laying eggs for a while, your bees are getting older and older and older, and even if you put in a new queen, they wouldn't be able to actually rescue the hive. Okay, so often people wait a little bit too long to get a new queen. You know, you're a new beekeeper, you can't find the queen very easily, so you think, oh, I just missed her, I can't see any eggs, I'm pretty sure those were larvae. And then pretty soon you're like, well, there's capped brood, but I don't see any larvae. And then you're like, oh, there's not very much capped brood. Maybe I should call somebody. And by that point, your workers are already another 20 days older. And it's kind of too late to try and raise a new queen because there's no brood around. And if you put in a new queen, they may crash before she can actually produce anything. So you have 21 days before you can replace those new ones. If the bees are already like 30 days old, it's not going to work out. So the key is to get it before there's a problem. So the hive, if it's doing really, really well, will actually make swarm cells. And it's really cool. I'm preparing to lecture for an advanced beekeeper class. And I'm looking up all the signals that they send each other. But the queen emits a pheromone that tells all the bees that she's there. And if you pull a queen out of a hive, the bees within a few minutes know it, and they start building new queen cells. And what it is when they sense there's brood, but there's no queen pheromone, they're immediately triggered to make new queen cells. So if a hive gets so big that the queen pheromone doesn't reach to the far reaches of the hive, the workers that are down there taking care of larvae are like, gosh, I doesn't feel like there's a queen in here anymore. And they'll actually start making queen cells. And so in that case, there's a strong queen, but she's so far away, the population is so big, that those guys feel like they're out in the periphery. And they actually start making more queen cells. And it's a signal that they're going to split off and make a new hive. So, and it's all based on this pheromone kind of feedback. If there's no brood and there's no queen, it triggers something completely different. Actually, what it does is it triggers the workers to start laying eggs. And that's another problem. I have a couple pictures of it. But usually if you have a worker laying eggs, it means your queen's gone, there's no brood. And what they're doing actually is that the workers lay eggs, those turn into drones, and they fly off and mate. And it's basically the last gasp of the hive trying to spread its genes throughout the valley somewhere. So, can you find the queen? A lot of people get obsessed about whether they can find the queen or not. It's actually not that big of a deal if you find the queen. What you really want to do is find eggs or larvae. And the difference between eggs and larvae is only 3 days. So you're talking 3 versus 6 days. It's nice to see eggs because then you know there was a queen in there in the last 3 days. But larva means there was a queen in there in the last 6 days. And if you haven't touched the hive in 6 days, it's probably still just fine. But the most common killer of a queen is it's beekeeper, unfortunately. So when you're pulling frames out of a hive, be extremely careful. Always grab like the outside frame, the furthest frame from where the bees are. Pull that out, set it aside, and now you have room to pry them apart and then have lots of space to pull them out. because they call it rolling the queen. If you just pull a frame out from the middle, bees on either side get smashed up against the other frames and rolled. And they can only take so much squashing. And you really want to avoid that. So people want to kind of jump the gun and go right for the middle and find out what's going on. Always break out the end frames first. So some people will actually go out of their way and actually log how much the queen is doing. These days with like cell phones and stuff, it's real easy to do. Especially if you have like a partner, you're inspecting the hives, you can just hold up the frame and have them take pictures of each side. And you can kind of measure, wow, she laid 200 eggs since last time, we looked at this. But really the idea is you want to just have as many frames of brood as possible at this time of year. So here's, I think I showed these last time, but it's hard to find the queen, but one thing I can see is the capped brood is all over the place. And this frame is occupied by a lot of bees, so that's a good sign. There's some kind of weird stuff like here, there's an open cap. So if there's an infected pupa, they'll actually tear it open and then pull that pupa out and throw it away. So if you see a lot of uncapped ones like that, especially the really dark ones, it means there's a lot of dying pupa. And then all these extra little holes, there's a couple reasons that could be. If you see this one might have antenna coming out of it, and what it is it's a bee that's crawling out of there. And these empty ones might be just ones that have emerged. And usually they leave kind of little ragged edge on it for about a couple hours, and then somebody comes and cleans it all off. So if you see a bunch of ragged edges, these might just be emerging. Here's another example. This is really what you want to see, a solid mass of bees over the capped brood. You can see that bee, that queen is huge. It'd be hard to miss that. So again, this is the sort of thing of beauty frame. And I've got a whole bunch more pictures of this, but if you notice, there's really light, darker, and then sort of medium dark. And what happens is the queen will lay eggs in a patch. So all of these were laid probably on the same day. And so those will all emerge on the same day. So if you wait another week, these will emerge first, all in one big group. Then another couple of days, 4 or 5 days, these will emerge. And then another 4 or 5 days, these will emerge. And you shouldn't see kind of spottiness. And then these empty ones, sometimes they'll have pollen in there, and some joker just put pollen right in the middle of the queen's frame. But other times what this is, these are eggs that either didn't hatch, or when they hatched, the larva kind of petered out and died off. That percentage of empty cells is totally good. This would be like a thing of beauty if you saw something like that. There's almost 2,000 new bees that are going to come out of the side of the frame. See a little bit of honey on the sides. And so eggs, if people have been looking for them, when they first lay them, so the first day, the egg sticks straight up and down. They're completely vertical. So the profile they have when you look in the bottom of the cell is the smallest possible profile you can imagine. As they get a little older, like 1 or 2 days, they kind of keel over a little bit and they're at an angle and they're easier to see. So like this is a brand new egg, just a little dot, but then this one's a little bit older and it's kind of keeled over to the side. If you have black foundation, it's usually pretty much a snap. The key actually is stand with the sun coming over your shoulder so you can look at it and the sun is shining down to the bottom of the cell. If the sun's in your eyes, you're just never going to see it. And it helps, you notice these cells actually are not very tall. So this queen is cranking out so many eggs, they can't even keep up with the cell building. And that might actually be the case right now for you guys. If you have new foundation, the bees they're drawing up these cells as fast as they can. But if the queen's really healthy, they're the ones that are rate limiting, not the queen. And so when you look, every single one of these cells should have an egg in it, because the queen won't leave one empty if she's on a roll. But if you look and there's like eggs here and there and spotty and stuff, it's usually a sign that the queen's not healthy. So here's So the larvae are, the larvae are probably what you're going to be able to see, especially if you have the light foundation. And really, the difference between this tiny little guy, or where's the one? This tiny little guy here and here is 3 days. So don't worry if you can't see the really tiny larva. But the C-shaped larvae are about 2 to 3 days old. And if you see a bunch of those, you should see them in groups. There's often a gradient of, and you can kind of see all the ones that are the same size are all the same age. And you can see how many she laid in one batch. And you should see groups of, 50 to 100 starting to form. If you don't have a lot of comb, that's maybe the rate limiting. But if you have a full frame of comb, you should see patches of 50 or 100. Because by midsummer, she should be laying 1,000 a day. So you'll see like a third of a frame like that previous frame I showed. So this is what to look out for for hives that are, this is a hive that's getting so strong that these bees are not close enough to the queen to be inhibited from making new queen cells. And these cells are from a hive that may not have been too weak, but you might have rolled the queen. Okay, so if a hive is sort of petering out and the queen is slowly losing fertility, you'll see just patchy brood all over the place. A little patch here, a little patch there, or just a single cell here or there. This one you can actually see it's a really good brood pattern. It's solid, and then there's tons of queen cells. So what happened here is they rolled a really good queen. So she was fertile. There were frame after frame of brood, and they killed her. And within a few minutes, they actually sense this, and they will go start building these up into queen cells. So they kind of look like a peanut. They're actually really big if you look compared to the regular cells. They're about as big as the first digit of your index finger. And they're modeled, and they're always pointing down, okay? So drone cells sometimes can look like this, but they're always horizontal. So they'll put them between the frames and on the bottoms of the frames, and you'll think it looks like a queen cell, but it's a drone cell.
So in that case on the right, would you go ahead and just let those queens emerge, and that's how you get your new queen, or would you remove those and re-queen?
Yeah, so this hive was rocking when that happened. So that means that all the different stages of brood were present when that happened. I'd be tempted to just let them make their own queen out of that. Especially if there were like 5 or 6 of them. If there was 1 or 2, I always get nervous. What I always do is hedge my bets. So if this is a great hive, what I'll do is I'll go through the hive and look for all the frames that have those, put that in one hive, and then I'll go buy a new queen to put into the new hive. So when you add a new queen to a hive, even if they didn't have a adult queen, they will kill it if they were raising some other ones. So you always want to leave it in a cage for about 2 days before you add it back to a hive. Because the other thing is, this is supersedure. Sometimes they do that because the queen is weak, not because she's dead. And if you just throw a queen in there, it's just like a free-for-all, a killer. So put it in there, and there's a way to actually test. You can get the queen and you can set it on top of the brood box, right on top of the frames. And the bees will come up to meet her because they can smell that queen pheromone. But if they just immediately start like trying to sting her, it means there's a queen in the hive that they will defend. And you better find her before you add a queen. A lot of times they'll carpet over her, but they won't, like, it's not really aggressive. And they're just waiting for a queen.
So I helped a friend who had a really healthy hive, and he was splitting it. He got into one hive, and there were supersedure cells all over, but there were also swarm cells in it. He probably in that one, it was a 2-box hive, there probably were 8 swarm cells and 15 supersedure cells.
Nice. Yeah.
So is the queen around, and what's going on there? So he just split it and just made sure that he left some of the supersedure cells in both boxes. He was just going to let it do it naturally. That was his.
Yeah, there was just somebody on the Facebook page that had that same thing. I would guess that there's a queen in there, and they were, they just kind of got over assertive about making swarm queens. And your best bet is to, the common advice is to kill these off to prevent swarming, or actually to kill these off and prevent swarming, but you always miss one. And the other thing is you haven't changed anything about their want to swarm. You've just killed off the queens and they'll just make another batch. So I always do is this is a signal the bees are telling you, we need more room. So I immediately split off as many as I can, because if you take half the bees and as many swarm cells as you can find and put them in a new hive, it simulates a swarming event. And what a lot of people will do is then if they can find the real queen, they'll move her to another location, because that's actually what happens in a real swarm. They make new queens, the new queen emerges, the old queen leaves with half the bees, and then that new queen goes out and mates. So you basically do what's called an artificial swarm. And a lot of people, I find this is the best way to do splits. Let the bees decide whether they're healthy enough to do a split, rather than me just go through and randomly do splits. And then the hives that really want to swarm, I make a ton of splits off of them. I think in my record I got 8 splits off one hive. And it was just a hive I didn't bother to collect honey from that year. And so they went into the winter with, I don't know, it's like 15 frames of honey. And in spring I went out there and they had 12 swarm cells, and I split it, and then they immediately made more swarm cells. So then I split it again and they made more swarm cells, and then I was like, wow, 8 hives.